think we're better start the webinar proper, hadn't we? So you're welcome everyone who's joined so far to this webinar. As I'm sure you're aware, having decided to join it, it is a webinar on the Material Insights platform, which is a platform hosted by TDi. In collaboration with the Responsible Minerals Initiative. This platform is a front end to a wealth of data which is held, curated, and maintained by TDi on subjects relevant to sustainability and ESG in mineral supply chains and other supply chains. So TDi has a large pool of data on voluntary standards in supply chains, on issues, public issues, negative impacts which are occurring in supply chains across a wide range of ESG issues, across a wide range of minerals and other material types, and data on mineral production, on reserves, on supply chain resilience. And one of the things that we've tried to do with this platform is put some of that data together into a front end that is accessible and usable by supply chain companies to arrive at some concrete material insights into their supply chains and into how to best conduct due diligence and prioritize due diligence steps in their mineral supply chains through some, what we hope are fairly simple, actionable, understandable analytics on where the biggest issues are and what's best to do about it. So the format here is I'm going to be asking Andrew a series of questions about material insights. We're going to be talking through it. And if you have any questions as we go, then please drop them into the chat. We can get to questions at the end, and we can hopefully get what you want out of the session and get some clarity on what it is that the platform can do and what it can do for you. So let's start off with a nice general question. Andrew, what is Material Insights?
Thanks for the introduction for everybody there to set the scene. Material Insights is an online platform for companies to learn about, understand, and act on the environmental, social, and governance risks in their mineral supply chains. And that can really mean quite a broad number of things in there. And it's a live website at the moment with different components on it, and there are more components being rolled out throughout the year. At the moment, we have material profiles, which are on a list of about 20 materials. We have in-depth profiles about different mineral supply chains, working from the ones which we think are the highest priorities. And we're looking at information about basic information about the extraction, how the materials are taken from the ground, what industries they're used from, the supply chain resilience of those materials, and also looking at ESG risk for those materials. I'm just looking to screen share the tool itself. So there is a premium and a public version of Material Insights. Just one moment. Can you see Material Insights here?
I can see it, yeah. If anyone can't see it, please say so in the chat.
Yes, so this is the current iteration of Material Insights, which is live, and there are the two main components which are currently live are the materiality comparison matrix. So what we've done is to look at more than 20 mineral supply chains, and we've assessed environmental, social, and governance risks in those supply chains by assessing the materiality of 19 different topics, such as deforestation, fragmented landscapes, radiation, child labor, forced labor. And we've quantified with a very low to very high scale the materiality of a specific issue in a specific supply chain. So you can see here, for example, child labor in cobalt is given a very high materiality. And uh, this data, and this allows you to compare a specific issue or different materials in the supply chain. For example, gold, tantalum, tin, and tungsten, 3TGs, are something which, for purposes of companies' due diligence, um, there are a lot of requirements on, and you can just select for these materials what are the most material issues. So you can see here that violence and conflict and child labor for all four of the 3TG materials get a very high score, with the exception of tungsten and child labor, which gets a high score. So yes, this really allows you to, in a comparable way, to assess the ESG risks in your mineral supply chains. Um, and then separately, each of these materials are linked to a material profile. So here you can really see in-depth information about ESG risk and understanding the supply chain of a specific mineral. So there's narrative supplied on just an introduction to the to a mineral itself, if you're not aware of it, what industries it's used in, what are its most common uses. There's also there's a suite of metrics, not just looking at who the top producers and who hold the top reserves are, but an overall assessment of supply chain resilience risk. Like with the materiality score, this is a 1 to 5, very low to very high assessment. And also for the countries which are the top producers of a given mineral, in this case gold, you can see aggregated scores for country governance risk, looking at 4 different areas: environmental governance, human rights record, the strength of the rule of law, and incidences of violence and conflict, and how systemic they are. Um, and you can also see who the top producers are of a given material. So you can see here that China produces the largest amount of gold here, and who holds the most reserves. And we also provide metrics on supply chain resilience risk. So we look at the supply chain concentration, price volatility, depletion, and end of life recycling rates. And then that is aggregated over all those 4 metrics. These each metric here has been defined by a different mathematical formula. And importantly, which is really one of the keys to material insights, they've been calculated in a way that's comparable across materials. So these different metrics have been calculated and then benchmarked against all the other materials and material insights to create a comparative score. So, for example, supply chain concentration is the Hermann-Herfindahl index for supply chain concentration, which just looks at who produces, how much production is concentrated in which country. So if one country produced 100% of all of one mineral, it would get a score of 1. And if it was perfectly distributed across all the countries, it would get a score of 0.001, etc. And supported by these metrics for each section of the material profiles, there are narrative descriptions and a generalized look at the supply chain phases, keeping in mind that gold is actually a very good example. It's impossible to, in one way, generalize the supply chain structure of many of these minerals. For example, with gold, it's alluvial mining. It can be carried out some places, but in many other cases, it comes from underground mining. So this is just to give a general understanding of how a particular mineral works, or how the most common method of extraction works. And yes, there's also a section on country governance risk. Some of these metrics were given at the headline at the top of the page, but here we look at the TDi's assessment of conflict-affected and high-risk areas for different countries. So some of the top issues here, Mexico and Russia are identified as high risk of being CARAs. And then there are also other governance indicators, which I spoke about before, for the individual countries. Then towards the end, there is an analysis of the main ESG risk topics. So the matrix that I showed you before for gold, these are, a narrative is explained of the different issues here. And we also include information from the US Department of Labor, which releases a list of which commodities in which countries are associated with child and forced labor. And in the case of gold, it's perhaps the most prolific example of child labor and of forced labor. It's again, gold is the most geographically distributed, widely distributed of all the minerals and material insights. It's got the lowest Herman-Herfindahl score. Yeah, and you can see that reflected here. And this is the exact data taken from the comparison matrix written into the profile. And then right at the bottom, there are lists of organizations and industry associations that can help work across a particular mineral supply chain to improve different aspects of it. Some are more general, some focus on a very specific area of a supply chain. So in the example of gold, the reduction in mercury use is quite a big target for a lot of organizations. Mercury is particularly environmentally harmful and harmful to human health. So, but this is part of the overarching theory of material insights for users to act. But I believe I've spoken in quite some depth about what's currently on the platform. Yes, we
That's
can
great.
move
Thank you.
on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the overview. That's great, Andrew. And looking at those ESG scores, the low, medium, high, very high, could you talk a little bit about how those scores are derived? You know, what's the data behind those scores and these color grades we're seeing in the matrix here?
Yes, so this is really one of the key bits of research for material insights. So this is an assessment of the materiality of a specific ESG issue and a specific mineral supply chain. So TDI has used our in-house web scraping tool with a set of more than 200 ESG risk keywords to find the most relevant articles for each mineral supply chain. We've then, with an automated web scraping tool, we've then had TDI has analyzed each of those reports. So every single article by international media organizations like Reuters or the United Nations or governments, host governments in particular countries. We've looked at a specific incidences they've reported of ESG risk. So that may be something as a week-long protest in Bolivia in a gold mine, where workers are protesting for increased compensation for work or increased improved labor conditions. And we have now amalgamated a database of well over 1,000 online reports, and these are graded for what we call gravity, reach, and resonance, which are brought together to construct the materiality score. So gravity looks at how serious a particular issue is. And here an issue is defined as a gap in expectations of a company in the sense of a supply chain. So sometimes issues arise, company respond to them, do what's expected of them, and the issue's remediated. That's not really an issue. The issue is when companies aren't doing what's expected of them by stakeholders. So for example, the gravity of an issue is really how wide the gap of the expectation is. So if yes, if it's a 3 day a small protest with 10 people and it's quickly remediated, that would be a low gravity response. If there are months of protests at many mine sites from one company and which can even turn violent, that'll be much higher gravity. The other aspects we look at are reach. So reach looks at how widespread the message is and how credible the message is. So this is a combined metric. So if a government has a major intervention to look at, well, for example, the Minimata Convention for mercury and gold supply chains, and has enacted legislation, that's extremely high reach because national governments are very, very influential, especially in the country that they're in. However, local environmental advocacy groups have less reach, particularly if they're not in a major world language. So that helps us take into consideration for each report, yeah, how credible and widespread a particular report is. Finally, we look at what we call resonance, which is a measure of how often this has resonated across different sources, which is a measure of how many times it's come up. Was it just reported once by a local advocate, or even sometimes perhaps even an individual that's spearheading a campaign, or did it come across many different sources in many different countries in an international way? So we aggregate this web scraping analysis across each mineral supply chain to calculate materiality scores for each ESG issue, and these are aggregated in a way that you can compare across supply chains.
Fantastic, and I think the comparison across supply chains is really the really key here, isn't it? Because as well as being able to see what risks are the most prominent for any given material, we can see how those materials stack up against other materials which a company might be sourcing, and so that allows effective prioritization of due diligence of supply chain
Exactly.
engagement for companies who might source a lot of different minerals, a lot of different materials, and want a way to know, should they be focusing their efforts on their copper supply chain, their cobalt supply chain, their graphite supply chain, or all three equally. It's like a great decision-making tool for those sorts of challenges which companies face.
Yeah,
But
and just
yeah, please go on.
one quick note before we move on. Um, the assessment of very low materiality for a given issue can also include the case where no online reports publicly available were found about a specific issue in a specific mineral supply chain, because we're also looking at materiality includes reputational risk. So if there's no reporting about it, there's no information available publicly about companies failing to meet expectations, then it's a very low materiality risk. There are also cases when risks where incidents were published about and covered, but just assessed to be very low materiality. So that's also important to note here.
Great. And tell us how Material Insights came about. Where did the whole concept arise?
Um, Material Insights is a partnership between the Responsible Minerals Initiative and TDi Sustainability. This is a project that it's been underway for years. And it's actually part of predecessor projects, which the RMI was also involved in. Um, I've switched to my slide deck. Can you see that?
I can.
Okay. Yes. So very important in all this, which really helps the reach of the Material Insights platform, is the collaboration with the Responsible Minerals Initiative, which is an initiative of the Responsible Business Alliance, which looks at responsible sourcing practices across all global supply chains. And as I said before, uh, there's premium and publicly available content, and what we've talked about, and the RMI have have worked with us in this to provide access to the premium content with their members. There's hundreds of companies which are RMI members, which get access to the premium content for the website. And to see the in-depth profiles, which I've displayed on the screen, RMI membership is one of the main ways to is the main way to gain access to content. And there's also possible third-party access to content in negotiation with the RMI and with TDi. So, but to answer your question more directly, material change was a report written by TDi Sustainability, which is a static report looking at a lot of the information that I've spoken about. So yeah, what are the main non-financial ESG risks in different mineral supply chains, with an effort to help companies prioritize what matches their values, what's most material for them, and what to focus on. Because ESG is a very wide field, and particularly a lot of RMI members are particularly the automotive and electronics companies have very complex products with extremely complex supply chains. So for example, a smartphone has more than 50 different materials which go into making it, and some of the components go across the world as they're being produced. So it's really impossible in many cases to assess and act on every risk in your supply chain. So you really have to prioritize things. So material change is a predecessor, the material change report, which is a publicly available report that many of our clients and other companies use today. Material Insights is the dynamic live version of that, with different bells and whistles on it as well. And TDi and RMI are working with industry associations and RMI members to develop the content that the companies who we're aiming for are looking to use. So this isn't just a monologue from us. This is a dialogue with many companies, and we're really keeping in touch with what companies care about the most, what we think can make the biggest impact for individual companies' due diligence practices, and also collaboration across industry between different companies.
Great. And on that note, what is going on at the moment with Material Insights? Because I understand that things are being developed and added to the platform all the time. So what's happening with some of those discussions and some of those parts of Material Insights that are in the pipeline we can expect in the next year or year and a half?
Well, there's quite a lot coming online, but for premium users. So as I alluded to before, the comparison matrix that you can see on screen here, this is available public to everybody, and the reports they're reduced versions available for free users. It's only the premium users that get the in-depth content. However, for both sets of users, there's a steady stream of materials being added to this matrix, and it'll be just under 50 materials, which we're looking at by the end. So every quarter, there are new materials added to this list, to the comparison table and to the material profiles. And also for example, the production data, which I showed before on screen, is updated every year as data comes online, or the country governance scores are also underlaid by data sources which are updated publicly. So there's a host of new additional components coming online, and I'd just like to show one here, which is just about to be launched in full. So this is looking at voluntary sustainability standards. Now, this really focuses more on what companies can do to act on a specific issue in their supply chain or to mitigate it. So what I've spoken about before is primarily about learning about and understanding risk. This really looks at more at the action of what you can do about it. So TDi has built a database of sustainability standards with a host of different information about different standards, and the tool allows you to focus on a specific mineral supply chain or mini or a specific issue, or looking at due diligence. And also, this tool is in development, and there is a comparison functionality which worked just before this call, but doesn't seem to want to work now. Of course, these things don't always work when you do them live. But yes, without the demonstration, there will be a comparison functionality which allows you to look at, for example, gold. I keep coming back to gold. Which can be very important for electronics manufacturers, which different sustainability standards are out there for gold and which one suits your company's values the best. So you can look at what kind of verification of a standard do they require? Is it an independent assessor? Is it third party? Or is it self-assessments? Does it look at due diligence? Does it look at the operational practices of a company? And which ESG risk areas does it cover? So it allows a side-by-side comparison of that, because standards particularly are an area where they're very complex, and it's very difficult to make a quick glance assessment of the standard. And this really uses the TDi and the RMI's expertise to look on what are the most important variables between standards and to help companies choose which one's best for them. Beyond that, there are other elements in the pipeline. We're also constructing a database of risk mitigation initiatives. So, for example, in the cobalt supply chain, there's the Fair Cobalt Alliance, which looks at addressing risks in the cobalt supply chain, which is a very well oft written about one to do with, as they're in Democratic Republic of Congo, there is a high level of ASM mining, and there's a lot written about cobalt as one example. And the Fair Cobalt Alliance allows companies to work to improve company performance and conditions for workers in cobalt supply chains. But there are many other examples beyond that in different supply chains, and this again aggregates the data and will allow companies to see what fits best for them, what's most interesting to them. And beyond that, there is also a material risk map, which will take a lot of the data which underlies the materials comparison table, which I showed, and allow companies to look at a specific supply chain in a specific country. What are the ESG risks in that country? What legislation is in place in that country that one needs to be aware of? Is there evidence of child or forced labor in that country? So it's a geographical tool for countries, especially some of the global companies that are RMI members. To help as a high level picture about where to begin and what kind of things they can do to mitigate the ESG risk in their supply chains.
Fantastic. And I think we'll just jump in with one of the questions from the audience here. I think we can handle it without derailing your flow too much, I hope. Peter asks, what date during the year will updates take place? Is it specific to each material, or will there be a revamp of the whole table?
So as materials are added each quarter, that is done on recent data. So usually 4 to 6 weeks before the data will be published. And then once a year, there are updates for all the materials featured on the platform. To include alongside the reports before, which we use a 5-year reporting window, so from 2017 onwards. Yes, they're added, and the materiality scores are adjusted automatically once a year.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And I think it's probably worth adding to that if we if there is some sort of major unfolding event which TDI would cover, and I don't think that's particularly relevant in the current context with the conflict in Ukraine and a lot of kind of fast evolving events. There is the capacity for us to add new data to the database to reflect that. To reflect any really kind of big breaking issues in mineral supply chains so that we're not tied to waiting for the next quarter or the yearly updates before those things get reflected. So there's a degree of flexibility in there in order to make sure that the analytics are showing up in the right way for suppliers, for companies to do supply due diligence.
That's right.
And perhaps I could ask you to talk a little bit about the underlying theory of change and the shall we call it a mission statement of Material Insights, what Material Insights is hoping to achieve and how with all of these data and analytics and tools for companies.
Uh, Learn, discover, act. To distill it to the purest form, which I alluded to before. So particularly with a look at systemic change and for very influential actors who have a really large footprint to change, it's what we're looking to do and who this is targeted at. So in a comparable way, we want supply chain actors, so auto companies, electronics companies, mining companies, to understand across the whole mineral supply chain the ESG risks that they're exposed to. So as I said before, there's really a whole host of different ones in a digestible, comparable way. And not only to learn about them, to really understand them and to help look at not just is there a risk of silicon produced in Xinjiang, which is part of the solar panel, and that a company produces, not just does that risk exist, but what's the likelihood of that risk? So really to understand it. And then act is really the important part of this. So for a company's own due diligence processes, what they're required to do, what they can do, what legislation might affect their operations in a certain country, and what are the worst risks, which help them identify um, to avoid unacceptable risks and to mitigate unavoidable risks, really. And then really the big vision of this is to leverage TDI and the RMI's expertise and the RMI membership to create systemic change across entire industries and even cross industry and across entire supply chains, which is really what the big part of what this is trying to drive. And then particularly with very influential actors, some of the RMI members are really some of the leaders in their industry. People often look to that, and then that can also create a sort of network effect where and also demonstrate thought leadership that a very large company, for example, that produces lithium batteries, if it's an electric vehicle producer, um, yes, change in their company policy or especially public facing policy can be very influential. So that's really what we're looking to try and do. Yeah, learn, discover, act.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Andrew. So I'm getting pretty close to the end of my questions here. So if anyone in the audience does want to ask any questions, please ask them now. Please drop them into chat, and if you can type quickly, then we're going to get them answered. Otherwise, I think we're going to look at wrapping up the webinar pretty soon. I hope that this has been informative for everyone. I hope you've had a bit more of a window into what the Material Insights platform does and how it could potentially help your organization. If you do want to chat any more about this offline, then please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or to Andrew. You can find both of our LinkedIn details from the LinkedIn invite, which you will have seen when signing up, I hope. Um, If you are short of any contact details, then please say so in chat. And just to let you know that the recording of this session can be made available as well. Andrew, I don't know if you have any final comments, any final thoughts to add on Material Insights.
Watch this space. I suppose it is my main insight. And yes, I think one thing that's yes, the value that the material profiles bring is really quite a lot. In different supply chains, there's really quite some interesting issues which arise, such as areas talc production for any cosmetic producers being smuggled from Afghanistan in a Taliban-controlled area to Pakistan, and a large amount of that market goes to the US, where a lot of major producers operate. There's really that's just one example of the kind of detail that this platform provides, and that membership and access to premium content can bring you. Yeah, so we've already assembled quite a big repository of research and actionable insights, and it's really growing, particularly in the next 3 to 6 months. There's a lot of new components to the website coming online, which will really expand the potential of the site.
Great, yeah. And I hear what you're saying about those perhaps slightly counterintuitive risks, like the sourcing risk from Afghanistan with the Taliban, and the conflict financing association there. Certainly, for myself, one of the most interesting things about Material Insights has been developing a methodology and developing a database on which to apply that methodology, and then seeing the things that arise out of it that you wouldn't necessarily expect. You know, it's not a huge piece of news to know that there are a lot of issues with child labor in the cobalt supply chain from the DRC, for example. But when you look at the analytics that come out in Material Insights, there are some perhaps much more unexpected results that make you kind of think again about whether your preconceived notions of where the biggest risks are and due diligence should be focused are correct, and whether you need to go back and take a second look. So I certainly find it a useful tool for challenging those preconceptions that everyone has about what to concentrate on, and looking at things in a more overall comprehensive, systemic way, and fundamentally comparable way to really kind of lay out those risks side by side, and see which ones are most demanding of your attention as a company, particularly a company with limited resources that needs to assign those resources in the most efficient way possible, and to do the most amount of good with the resources that are available. Anyway, thanks everyone for joining. And we'll please keep an eye on the TDi LinkedIn page. There will be other sessions with other TDi team members talking about some of their projects. And there will be other resources posted online, both on the TDi website and on Material Insights, as Andrew was saying, regarding some new resources that are coming there. So please keep an eye out, watch this space, and please reach out. Please reach out and collaborate as the Material Insights philosophy espouses. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for the session.
Thanks for listening.